Born and raised in Tampa, Florida. Started going to church when I was 2, attended this church, but I was never really sold out for the church. I just attended, but our family did church. My parents got a divorce, and that radically altered a lot of our thought and feelings. And then later on in life, I realized that I had been adopted, that my biological father had left me when I was young, and it created this whole season of life where anger and bitterness and resentment stirred up, because if my biological father would leave and abandon me, was I really worth fighting for? And did they really want me? And it really navigated and formulated how I operated my teenage and early 20 years, because I just felt like, man, if a father could leave his kid, then I wasn't worth fighting for.
For me, growing up, I remember from the age of like five or six, giving my heart to Jesus. And I really just felt like I was God's girl. I felt special to him. I felt safe with him. From a very young age, I would sit and have, quiet time with him and talk with God, and he was my safety. He was my refuge.
I get into my high school years, and baseball is my God at this point. It's everything that I live for and what I play. I transferred to a private school to play baseball. Was the starting pitcher and the guy on the team. But there was this starting pitcher of the softball team that was absolutely gorgeous. And so that's when I met her. She was a sophomore, and I was a senior when we started dating. And everyone, looked at her like, what the heck are you doing? And I'm like, what are you talking about? But we started dating. She graduates, and 7 months later, we walked down an aisle together at 19 and 20. But I had never been healed from trauma as a child. And so all this baggage that really at the time she didn't even know about, I carried in a whole set of suitcases that she had no idea of. And so you go into early 20s, it's a hot mess.
There was a lot of heartache at the beginning of our marriage because we weren't on the same platform. We weren't serving the same God. We weren't believing the same things. We weren't standing on the same things.
So we had babies early. I have 3 beautiful boys, Dylan, Nathan, and Logan. Again, I was not saved. And so there was a lot of deep hurt inside of me, a lot of pain. And so that pain manifested itself in our home through emotional and verbal abuse, just shortness of words, rude. It just created a real tension in the home. One day I had been playing poker for 2 years, and one day I was headed out to a poker tournament that I played every single day, and was walking out the living room. I took a phone call from a friend who was part of my accountability group that didn't know I was playing poker. And I answered the phone, and he goes, "Are you playing poker?" And in that moment, I was so angry because I'm like, wait, how did you know this? Like, my world that only her and I knew was about to come crashing down. And he goes, "Well, that doesn't matter. Just answer the question." And I'm like, "No, it does matter. Why do you think I'm playing poker?" And the phone died. And I remember throwing the phone across the room, just out of sheer anger that I was going to have to deal with this. And the moment the phone hit the couch on the other side of the room, I hit my knees and began to sob uncontrollably. I mean, I remember like it was yesterday. And I remember only being able to say a few things that my entire life I had run from God. And I remember sitting on my knees right there and declaring that from that moment forward, I was going to surrender everything about my life to him, and that I would spend the rest of my days talking about him. I got saved, and then they got to see this guy that God had created, and they got to grow up with a man that created an environment where joy and laughter is what ruled our home. Like, it was about the environment. And so thankfully we had a loving home. We had 3 boys that love each other. I mean, they were the best of friends, and they were all athletes. They were all the most gorgeous kids on the planet, according to their mom. And it's like, beautiful. They were friends and popular. Just, they did all the things. We made the memories. We took all the trips. It was just what you would sign up for as a family. When you look at, man, what is that? It wasn't on social media. It was in real life.
We filled the spring breaks with the fun things. We filled the summers with the list of the things the kids wanted to do. We're very fortunate that Logan and Kurt and I went on his senior trip, got to take him skiing. I remember literally skiing on top of this ridge, filming Kurt and Logan skiing and thinking, what a blessed life we live.
Hey Mom, I know you're watching this. I just want to say that I love you.
May 30th was a normal day. Danette and I hung around the pool together. Logan was at the beach with his girlfriend and some friends.
They came home and we watched a movie. Logan had his head laid on my shoulder and Caitlin had her head laid on his. And we sat there and ate popcorn and watched Napoleon Dynamite.
About 9:35, he took a phone call that his girlfriend needed to come home. And so Logan and Caitlin loaded up and drove away. A few minutes later, a mom just knows, and she texts and calls and there's no response, and that was never a thing for our kids. So I remember her telling me something's not right, and I'm like, they're gonna be fine. No, something's not right. I was like, okay, well. So I loaded up to drive the route that would have been the route. It was a little rainy that night, but there was nothing. So I came back and I got her and I just said, something's not right. I don't know what it is, but they're not on the path and they haven't made it to her house. And so we drove back to the last ping that our phone had given to where he was. And we sat and we waited and just prayed. We called the officers because at this point it had been about an hour now. They just began to walk and look at all the pings and look at where everything was. And I remember them getting on the radio and just telling us, hey, we need to call a few more people in. At that point, we just realized that something wasn't right. Then the dive team rolled up with the boats and the scuba gear. And by now it's about 12:30, and Steps Towing, which is a huge towing company down in our area, rolls in a big semi-rig. Then I remember when the officers came over and tell us that they had found the vehicle and that our babies were inside. There it was, about 1:45. My family loaded up and 7 of us had gone to the pond and 6 of us went home. You know, we go home and I'll never forget those hours, the 6 of us wailing on the floor.
To encounter the fact that we're walking back into a home with graduation decorations still up from a party we had just had, and his photos everywhere, and his diploma sitting there, and realizing that we're gonna have to take these decorations down without our graduate here. I think the hardest moment for me that night, besides the realization of what was actually happening, was the fact that I couldn't fix it. And as a mom and as a dad, you just want to fix it. That perfect life that I was so thankful for had changed in a moment.
You know, hours turned into days turned into weeks of just going through immense grief. So many questions as to the faithfulness of God. Who is God? How does a good father allow such a terrible thing? How is this my story? How is this real? Everyone's knocking on your door. Phones are blowing up. You know, as it's getting out now, news people are calling the house. Detectives are coming to my house to ask me, you know, crazy questions about my son.
As I began to wail and as I began to cry, my oldest son sat on the left side of me and my husband sat on the right side. And my middle son sat on my lap like a toddler. and he just began to sing, "Christ is our firm foundation." He's never let me down when everything around me is shaken.
But I will tell you that in those times of immense grief, I think I had some of my sweetest times with the Lord. I learned in those moments that I serve a good Father. I learned in those moments that all the emotions that He formed inside of me, He's okay to handle. So in my desperate quiet times at 3 a.m, screaming at the top of my lungs at God and throwing things across my house out of just anger, I had a Father who just listened.
And we started asking God, if you're going to choose this as our story, then God, you have to make it count.
It became the mantra of our family. In our fallen, broken world, this happened. And God could have changed it, but He didn't change it. Then we were going to live our lives that every day heaven looked different because we walked this planet. That our son's legacy would go far farther than he could have ever taken it himself. That every time we took a platform, they would hear about the goodness of God and the character of who God is.
Through the last few months now, we're almost at a year, I think the most helpful thing that I could possibly do is to be as vulnerable and real with Jesus as I am. The plan for my life has looked very, very different. I realize in these moments that He doesn't need my perfection, He just needs me. And sometimes that's really pretty and put together with hands raised. And sometimes that's really ugly and weeping on the floor. But either way, He accepts me.
I have learned a lot here recently that how fluid feelings are. Feelings are so based upon your surroundings and what's happening, whereas your faith is based upon immovable. It's based upon the character of who God is, and those things are not determined by anything other than by the character of God. And so as this feeling is kind of a moving target, faith is this constant, authentic thing.
And so whenever I have a really hard day, I have to force myself to choose to look at my suffering through the cross. That's the only thing that actually makes anything matter, is the hope of the cross.